everyone, welcome to this India Today special. As the world grapples with the coronavirus pandemic and India completes a month of a national lockdown, lots of questions are swirling in the wind. To answer those questions, I'm joined by two very special guests. Please welcome from Geneva, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. She's the Chief Scientist of the World Health Organization, and Dr. Maria van der Kerkhof. She's the COVID-19 Technical Lead. Thank you both very much for joining us here on India Today. Before I come to India, I want to look at the global picture. And Dr. Swaminathan, how do you see the world today in the last week of April? Do you believe we are in a better place than we were at the end of March in combating corona? Or, as the WHO Director General seemed to indicate the other day, the worst may be yet to come?
Thank you, Rajdeep. I think we are living through really challenging times. And one of the challenges, of course, is being faced with a new virus that humanity is seeing for the first time. We're learning every day, and yet we're not able to predict the future. What we do know is that this virus is highly transmissible, that it has gone into practically every country, that countries and regions are being affected at different periods in different waves, but that all countries are making efforts, to really, and each country is learning from the experience of the ones that have just gone through a wave. And therefore, I think that as we evolve, as this virus continues to become, more established within people, this pandemic could take varying routes. A lot is going to depend on what countries do. So it's not just the virus, but it's also what we do.
I want to understand that you've got the United States on one side, Dr. Maria, which has recorded more than 50,000 deaths now, and which has recorded just 700. I'm just saying just 700, but when contrasted with 50,000. So is the pandemic affecting different parts of the world very differently? And what's the reason for that?
So that's a good question. So as you suggest, every death is significant, and every life that we can save is worth saving. And so what we're seeing is this virus is very transmissible. Once it has an opportunity to establish itself, once it has an opportunity to take hold and actually take off, it can grow very, very quickly. And in some countries, it's taken some time to be able to establish itself before it takes off. In other situations, in other countries, it's taken off relatively quickly. What we are seeing there are certain things that work in terms of suppressing transmission. And what works is aggressive case finding, empowering the entire population to know what they can do to protect themselves, what they can do to protect their loved ones, to be able to prevent infection from themselves and to prevent onward transmission. And we know that finding where the virus is helps, because when you do that, you can prevent it from moving to somebody else. So testing is really important. Being able to test all the suspect cases, being able to isolate all of the confirmed cases, contact tracing, find every contact of a known case and quarantine those contacts. We know that that works. We know that caring for individuals early on in their disease course can help prevent from progression to more severe disease and death. So there's a lot of things that we can actually do to prevent transmission from exploding.
But yet, Dr. Swaminathan, those numbers are very striking. If you look at South Asia and contrast it with, let's say, Europe, the United Kingdom, and North America, there is a huge difference. So I'm just trying to understand, is the virus operating in very different ways in different countries, or is it because of the kind of responses that we are seeing, particularly in South Asia, when contrasted perhaps with Europe, that the virus doesn't seem to be as virulent here? What explains the fact that India, relatively speaking, seems to have escaped the worst so far?
Well, there could be, many reasons for this, Rajdeep. And as we say, we haven't seen the end of this yet. And so we mustn't get complacent that India and South Asia are over the battle and that we're out at the other end. Certainly not. But there are differences in population demographics. The huge load in the hospitals that we've seen in Europe and North America has largely been driven by the fact that they've been large number of elderly. If you look at the death toll in Italy, the average age of people who died there was 81. and a number of them obviously have other coexisting comorbidities. India and Africa have relatively younger demographics. The other thing that's been noticed is that where there's a lot of travel, so places in the world which have a lot of international travel have actually seen, the brunt of it. And of course, in India as well, that's how it came in through people who've been traveling in other parts of the world, but perhaps relatively less people traveling than, the big hubs like New York and London. That could be another reason. And also in a very large population, it also takes time for the effects to become evident in terms of a large number of deaths. And I do think that early action taken in terms of really putting in place a lot of screenings at the borders, at airports, at excellent tracking, contact tracing, isolation, I think those public health measures certainly have played a role in keeping, the curve relatively low and relatively flat.
If I can add to that, it is the early action that we've seen, especially in countries across Asia that have had experience with SARS in the past. They saw these notices immediately. When we first became aware of this on the 31st of December through a report from Wuhan about this cluster of atypical pneumonia, we immediately activated our systems because of our experience with other coronaviruses and other emerging respiratory pathogens. On the 5th of January, we put out a notice to all of our member states and contact points across the globe that said, look out. This is something that you need to look out for, and look out for this respiratory infection practice, the basics around respiratory infections, acute respiratory infections. And we see really, really early action. By the time we raised the alarm of a public health emergency of international concern on the 30th of January, many countries had already taken action. We had an excellent presentation by the Minister of Health from India yesterday at the member state briefing, and he demonstrated and showed that at the time we announced a public health emergency of international concern, there was one case in India. And at that point, all of your systems were activated. And in many countries across Asia and many countries that saw the opportunity to suppress transmission, they had already activated their systems. They took this very, very seriously, knowing that as a respiratory pathogen, there are opportunities for this virus to take off. And so that early action has saved lives.
Let's look at that debate which is going on in the health community between lockdown versus herd immunity. Dr. Swaminathan, do you believe one size fits all, that the lockdown as done in India now for the last month is the way forward, social distancing? We saw what the United Kingdom attempted with herd immunity. I still hear epidemiologists who say eventually this has to be resolved through herd immunity. Where does the WHO now stand? Is there clarity that one size fits all, that there is a testing, tracing, quarantine protocol almost in place that the entire world must necessarily follow?
Rajdeep, there are the basic public health measures, the tried and tested public health measures that we know work. And those have worked in this outbreak as well. It's just that many countries today don't have the machinery and were not able to put in place immediately those measures that you described. One size cannot fit all. Countries are at different stages of their healthcare system. They have different demographics, different population structures, and of course, different economic considerations as well, though, this has affected economics all over the world. And therefore, the guidance that WHO puts out is always giving all the different options and opportunities for countries to design their own programs. So this is true for all of our technical guidance, because, you can't have one guidance that applies to 194 countries with completely different scenarios. So WHO's technical guidance is always interpreted at the country level with the support of the WHO country office and the regional office, to tailor the interventions to the needs. And another thing is, in this response, we've also said we have to be adaptable, agile, and watchful all the time, and that data should guide our future actions.
No, absolutely. The question that you mentioned about herd immunity,
Sure,
what we're learning now from seroprevalence studies,
Yes.
which are looking at the extent of infection in the population. They're very early studies yet, and we haven't had a chance to evaluate them completely. But what we're seeing from a number of countries is that when you look for evidence of infection through antibody tests, these serologic tests, that a lower proportion of the population appears to have been infected, nowhere near reaching the level of herd immunity that you would need for this virus to fizzle out. And so we have a long way to go. That many people across the globe remain susceptible, which means that,
So
that this virus has an opportunity to keep taking off.
Are you saying, Dr. Maria, for a country like India, 1.3 billion, therefore herd immunity is not an option at the moment? The option is a lockdown, because there are those who will say, a lockdown can never be the final solution, because we're also seeing in some countries a second wave, and that's the fear that is being expressed. We've seen some cases now in South Korea where there's been a second wave. Those who are reportedly cured are getting the virus again. So one wonders how long can one sustain combating the virus through a lockdown? Is the lockdown simply an exercise at buying time?
The lockdown is an exercise in buying time, but it is not a long-term solution. There are so many other impacts of a lockdown that cannot be sustained for a long time. So what this time buys you is the ability to build up your workforce to detect cases, to make sure that you have people who can go out and do contact tracing and find the virus. It gives you time to increase your testing capacity so that you know where the virus is. If you know where the virus is, you could tailor your efforts in that certain geographic area. And then you can lift other parts of the country. Other parts of the country can reestablish what I think is going to become a new normal. I mean, I think in terms of what we understand about this virus, as Dr. Soumya has said, we don't know the exact trajectory. It's completely dependent on what countries do. But long-term lockdown is not the solution. So what we're seeing from countries is that they're using different approaches to see what is it that we can do to get people back to work, to get children back to school, to ensure that we can put food on the table, but that we minimize the opportunity for this virus to take off. And that requires a tailored approach in each country and at a lower subnational level. There isn't also a one-size-fits-all in every country, throughout every country. So it's important that it's an evidence-based, it's an iterative process so that you're learning about what this virus is doing, you're learning about how your public health and social measures work, and then you adapt them as we go on.
Dr. Swaminathan, the reason that is asked increasingly in India, because now we've been, through 4 weeks of a lockdown, it goes on for another fortnight, and people are obviously getting increasingly frustrated, a large population under a lockdown. If you look at the numbers, the data, while coronavirus spreads, its spread seems to be largely concentrated on particular areas. 12 districts have reported more than 200 cases each. We are now doubling the number of cases only every 10 to 14 days. Earlier, before the lockdown, it was only 3 to 4 days. So there's pressure that, we've got to relieve the system from this lockdown, a national lockdown, only focus on the so-called hotspots and containment zones. Do you agree with that eventually you're going to have to focus on specific areas? You cannot sustain a national lockdown to contain the virus?
Certainly. As Maria was saying, the lockdowns are not long-term solutions, because you can't you can't exist forever in a state of lockdown, and therefore you have to. And it's not it's not like either a lockdown or nothing. It's not that at all. So what the lockdown does is actually gives the health system and all the other parts of government. We have to remember also that most of the government machinery has to adapt to this and set up new ways of doing things. But mostly the health department, the health ministries really have to prepare themselves. So in terms of having testing, availability, very, very important that we should be able to continue to put in place surveillance systems. You do syndromic surveillance as well, other than just diagnosing the COVID cases. That gives you good indicators of what's going on. You put in place the physical distancing measures, put in place policies at workplaces for public transport, for people when they go out, put in place, and then, of course, the public education is extremely important. And we have to let people earn their living and their daily bread, but at the same time we have to protect them. And I think the vulnerable in India, we have a huge population of the poor and the vulnerable. We have to do everything possible to support that group and And for them, it's, they have to go out and earn a living, but at the same time. So I think also monitoring is going to be really important. As you said, figuring out where the virus is, focusing our efforts there, but at the same time, keeping an active vigil in the other parts of the country, because this virus can very easily move, of course, from one place to another. So I think most countries are going to be looking at establishing a sort of a situation where the virus is there, it's going to keep transmitting. We are going to keep seeing cases, but it should be at a level at which it's manageable by the health system, in addition to managing all of our other health problems. So this becomes another disease that you manage. I don't know if you want to add anything, Maria.
No, that's perfect.
The word being used is manage. Is the challenge, Dr. Maria, to manage the virus at the moment or to find a solution? I know that human trials have begun at Oxford University this week. Trials are beginning in Germany, in America. Is that really where eventually the virus will have to be, in a way, combated? Whatever we do through human intervention in terms of lockdowns, eventually we have to find the vaccine or a combination of drugs. How far are we, according to the World Health Organization, from that?
I'll let you answer that.
So, in fact, the word herd immunity is usually used with vaccines. When we talk about herd immunity for measles, we say we have to achieve a 95% coverage in order to get herd immunity, so that even if the 5% are not immunized, the rest of the population is protecting that. So that's where we want to get to with the vaccine. But yes, I think we all agree that having a vaccine against COVID-19 would certainly go a long way in protecting our populations. And so as there are over 100 in some stage of clinical development or the other. Pardon?
How far do you think we are away from that, or you don't want to speculate on that?
No, we can have some educated guesses about that, and just to put it in perspective, normally vaccines take 10 years to develop. That's the average timeline. The Ebola vaccine took 5 years to develop. A Zika vaccine actually took less. It took less than 2 years, but Zika had actually sort of petered out by then. Here, the world is racing to develop a vaccine in much less than that. We're looking at 12 months. It would be unprecedented. It needs global collaboration. As you mentioned, there are 6 candidates already into phase 1 trial, and the first Chinese vaccine has gone into phase 2 trials. And so what the WHO is doing now is to really organize what we know is going to be a series of candidates coming through. So we need to prioritize them. We need the scientists to look at them, decide which ones go into phase 3 trials, and set up the sites, just like we did the Solidarity trial for drugs. We want to do the same for vaccines, where we are prepared. So the first few candidates start coming out from the phase 1-2 trials, can then go into the larger trials in order to test their efficacy and safety. Because, again, it's a new virus and there were no pre-established animal models.
But Dr. Maria, the word which is used again and again, testing. And there are various forms of tests. There are rapid tests and there are other forms of testing. What is interesting, though, in India, Dr. Maria, is a number of the patients are being found to be asymptomatic. Does that worry you? ICMR figures vary from 69% to 80%. So the nature of testing, should that change given the large number of asymptomatic patients? Do you do pool testing? Do you do rapid testing? What form of testing? And how do you see this large pool of asymptomatic patients?
So we recommend testing of all suspect cases that fit our case definition and contacts who develop symptoms. But what we're seeing is that contacts that are being followed, medically followed, are being tested early. And that's where a large number of the asymptomatic people are being detected. What we're trying to better understand is when we hear these large numbers of asymptomatic individuals, are they truly asymptomatic? I think what we're finding from many countries is that those that are labeled as asymptomatic are very mildly symptomatic. They're not feeling well. They may not have fever and a cough yet, but they're starting to feel generally unwell. They may have a low-grade temperature, but it wasn't something that they registered. They may have had some chills. They may have had a headache. There's a lot of symptoms that people can have before they reach fever and a cough. And I think some of these asymptomatic individuals are truly just early in their symptom onset. What is important is, what do these individuals play? How do they play a role in transmission? Are they shedding virus? Are they shedding live virus? Are they infecting others? And through some viral shedding studies, what we know is that people right around the time they develop symptoms, even very early, seem to be the most infectious. But we can have individuals who can shed virus, who can transmit before they develop symptoms. What's important, though, is that you have to have respiratory droplets. It's still spread by respiratory droplets. So you still need to cough, you still need to sneeze, you still need to, have these infected particles transmit between people. So the physical distancing is really important. The hand washing remains important. That respiratory etiquette remains important. No matter what, no matter where you are in the world, that needs to be practiced by all people everywhere, and that can help. And we also recommend the use of medical masks for people in the community who are feeling unwell.
Right, both of you seem to be suggesting don't get complacent, because there are a number of people in this country perhaps, and who are also opinion writers who are saying the World Health Organization is exaggerating this. We got SARS under control, we got MERS under control. Coronavirus's infectability is not really very different in South Asia in particular from these diseases. Mortality is lower. So what would you tell those who are saying that WHO is unnecessarily spreading panic? Dr. Swaminathan, Maria, final comments. What would you tell those who are saying, look, let's get back to work?
I think WHO's responsibility is to provide the best evidence-based guidance and recommendations. And remember, the way we work is through our network of experts and scientists. Of course, we have our own experts within WHO, but we have huge networks, and that's the way WHO has operated right from the beginning, from the time it was set up. The best people from all over the world come together, look at what's available, assess the state of knowledge, and make recommendations. And I think it's been very balanced as far as this outbreak is concerned. WHO has been criticized for not doing enough, for doing too much, for overreacting. But one, you have to act on the basis of what you know. And I think if you look at our guidance that's come out right from early January up to now, it's been updated as new knowledge has come out. And we've prepared countries to face the worst. And you've seen how countries' health systems have been devastated by it. And so I don't think anyone can say that, this is a virus that's just not, we shouldn't take it seriously, or that it will go away. And because some countries have done the right thing and we haven't seen those peaks, it speaks more to the importance of those public health measures. I think we should strengthen those rather than say, oh, we haven't had an effect and so this virus isn't going to do any damage. No, I think we need to be alert. We can take comfort in that things haven't got out of hand, but yet we can't relax any of those measures that have been put in place.
World will be completely different, a post-corona world. You've known India better than most. Do you believe, therefore, Indian society will also have to change the way we live our lives in a post-corona world?
We all have to make changes in the way we live, Rajdeep, for the foreseeable future, till we get perhaps other solutions, drugs and vaccines, that we can control this like we've done other diseases. And I think that will happen. Science will provide a solution. But for the immediate future, for the next couple of years, we really have to change the way we are used to living. Each of us has to be very conscious of our actions. And as Maria was saying, we protect not only ourselves, we have to be thinking about how do we protect others, how do we protect people in the family, in our communities. We have to support and help each other as well. This is a time where a lot of people are going through not just economic stress, but huge amount of mental stress and anxiety. And we need to support each other. We need to be also very compassionate. And please, let's not stigmatize people who have this infection. Anyone can get it. It's not your fault if you get it. In fact, we need to provide more support. And it pains me when I see reports of stigma and discrimination against people or communities that are infected. We have to stay far away from that.
That's a very, very strong message that you've sent out there, Dr. Swaminathan. Do not stigmatize those who've been affected by coronavirus. Thank you both very much for joining me. This has been enormously educative. I really appreciate it. Dr. Maria Van der Kerkhof and Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, it's been a pleasure talking to you there in Geneva. And thank you, viewers.
Thank you, Raj.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye for now.
Hello everyone, this is Rahul Kamal here. Hope you enjoyed this video. For the latest news and analysis, like and subscribe the India Today YouTube channel and don't forget to press the bell icon to stay updated.